Hello everyone, it's Mimi here. BMS working in the NHS. And today's video will be about tissue selection, which is part of the IBMS specialist portfolio in cellular pathology. So, just a quick introduction to this video. It will be short and sweet, I promise. It will be focused on the second subsection of the specialist portfolio called tissue selection. I will discuss knowledge requirements, competence requirements, reflective statement, evidence of achievement, Q&A suggestions, possible evidence ideas and some helpful tips to make your portfolio really good. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the content of my video and I hope you will learn a lot. So let's dive into the second subsection of the first section: tissue preparation techniques, tissue selection. Knowledge requirement is what it is expected of you to know and understand to demonstrate your knowledge is at the specialist level. Think about what knowledge you had as a Band 5 BMS. How would that differ to the knowledge as a Band 6 BMS? That specialist level of knowledge would allow you to troubleshoot, problem solve, verify, validate, help others and maintain high-quality service. Let's have a look at the first knowledge requirement, for which you need to know about the invasive and non-invasive surgical procedures and their relationship to the collection of histology and cytology specimens, fluid, biopsy, resection. What are invasive and non-invasive surgical procedures when it comes to sample collection for histology and cytology? Consider procedures like evacuation, aspiration, exfoliation, FNAs, FNBs, punches, shaves, curettage, EBIS, TURB, TURP, incisions, excisions, resections and so on. Which procedures are considered invasive and which are not? Also consider types of samples these produce, like cores, punch biopsies, fluids, washes, bushes, and so on. When would each procedure be used? Is there a difference how those obtained specimens are processed in the lab? Consider it from this section point of view. Consider diagnostic versus therapeutic reasons. The second knowledge requirement is for you to know key anatomical specimen sites. What are the key anatomical specimen sites? What types of specimens do you receive in your lab from those sites? Consider anatomical sites like cardiothoracic, neuroendocrine, GI, or gynecological. What types of samples would be taken from those sites? Consider shave, core, loop, wedge and others. What procedures would be used to obtain tissue from those sites? Try to link this knowledge requirement to the previous one. The third knowledge requirement is for you to know principles of tissue selection and the factors that need to be considered. What are the principles of tissue selection in histopathology? How would you know what tissue part needs to be selected for histological analysis? Consider location of the tissue or abnormality, size and type of the tissue, relevant margins, abnormal areas, surrounding normal tissue, sample representation, and so on. Ask yourself, what factors do you need to consider when selecting tissue for histological analysis? You can think of the size of the abnormality, margins, need for orientation, presence of calcification, whether you have access to macropath images, RC-path guidelines, and so on. Why are those factors important? What would happen if a wrong part of the specimen was selected for analysis? Try to include specific examples from your practice. The fourth knowledge requirement is for you to understand the need to log sample details and avoid sample mix-up. How do you log sample details in your laboratory? Why is it important? What would happen if there was a sample mix-up? How would you deal with a mix-up of specimens? Consider PID checks during specimen reception, labeling of samples, LIMS systems used in your lab, tracking systems used in your lab such as Vantage, macroscopic description of samples, details of blocks taken, fate of the sample after dissection and so on. The fifth knowledge requirement is for you to understand the need for further or alternate fixation methods. What specimens would need further fixation? Consider resections that need opening or inflation, delay to fix samples. Are there any alternative fixation methods used in your laboratory? If so, what are they and why are they used? Consider any non-gynae fluids and their fixation method, frozen sections, if samples, renals, and so on. The sixth knowledge requirement is for you to understand the need to pin out specimens. Why do some specimens need to be pinned out? Consider anatomical orientation, shrinkage, curling, margins. What types of samples are usually pinned out? Consider HNN resections, mucosal samples EMR, skin excisions. The seventh knowledge requirement is for you to understand the principles of tumor grading and staging with respect to tissue sampling. What are principles of tumor grading and staging? How can tissue selection affect tumor grading and staging? Consider specific principles of grading and staging like size, spread, cell appearance, aggressiveness, grading systems available, TNM system, or molecular profiling. Also consider sample adequacy, size and quality, sample representation, sampling bias that can affect grading and staging tumors. The eighth knowledge requirement is for you to understand the rationale of tissue selection procedures in your laboratory, relative to your scope of practice. What tissue selection procedures do you perform? What is the rationale of this procedure? How do you know you are selecting the right tissue for histological analysis? Consider SOPs, RC Path guidelines, or NICE guidelines, training and competency assessments. Try to use specific examples from your own practice. Competence requirement is basically a combination of knowledge, skills, and experience one needs to perform a job to a satisfactory standard and level. Your chosen evidence should demonstrate these competence requirements. The following competence requirements need to be met for this section. The first competence requirement for this section is for you to apply appropriate criteria for tissue selection within the cellular pathology lab. What are the criteria for tissue selection in your lab? What tissue selection procedures can you perform in your lab? Why are you selecting certain blocks for certain tissues? Show your understanding of the tissue selection procedures. Consider SOPs, RC Path and NICE guidelines, your training and competency documents. The second competence requirement is for you to assist with consultant-led specimen dissection and maintenance of appropriate specimen records. How do you assist pathologists, dissectors during dissection? How do you maintain appropriate specimen records? Consider electronic dictation, written notes on the form, macropath images, proformas, limbs, block guide, block details, specimen fate following dissection, inking of specimen, specimen orientation, specimen weighing, traceability of the sample following dissection, and so on. The third competence requirement is for you to take dictation at specimen dissection. This links closely to the previous requirement. Do you take dictation when you assist during dissection? What form of dictation is it, digital or written? Why is dictation important? What would happen if the dictation was not taken? Consider electronic dictation, written notes on the form, macropath images, proformas, limbs, block guide, block details, specimen fate following dissection, inking guide, traceability of the sample following dissection, and so on. The fourth competence requirement is for you to assist with the pinning out of specimens, as appropriate. Some samples are usually received to the laboratory already pinned out. So, you might not be able to assist with the pinning out of the specimens. However, you might be able to assist when the dissection of pinned out sample is performed in the laboratory. How are those samples approached? Why is the methodical approach for dissection of pinned out samples important? What would happen if those samples were not dissected methodically and precisely? What are the RC Path guidelines for pinning out specimens? The fifth competence requirement is for you to label cassette accurately in order to maintain the link between the sample and request. Why is specimen labeling important? What labeling system is used in your laboratory? What could happen if the sample was incorrectly labeled? Can the sample be tracked throughout the laboratory? How is the sample tracked in your laboratory? Consider LIMS system, tracking system, methodology used to generate cassettes, equipment used to generate cassettes, checking accuracy of generated cassettes, and so on. The sixth competence requirement is for you to transfer Category A specimens from pot to cassette. What are Category A specimens? Do you perform specimen transfer in your laboratory? What are the key things that need to be performed during the sample transfer? Consider description, special instructions, block details, PID checks, contamination, cleanliness, and so on. Also consider specific examples from your practice and how you approach them during specimen transfer. The seventh competence requirement is for you to troubleshoot problems which may arise, including root cause analysis, as appropriate. What problems could arise during specimen selection? How would you resolve them? Consider problems with cross-contamination, lost or missing sample, incorrect PID information, incorrect sample type, lost dictation, mix-up of samples, incorrectly labeled cassettes. Also consider possible resolutions of these problems. Each section also contains reflective statement which is asking you, the candidate, to summarize your role in the laboratory in the context with each section. When you complete all the subsections within this section, you will be required to write a reflective statement. You also need to write a personal reflection on your training and why you chose your evidence. To prepare for that, write a smaller reflective statement for each subsection. What is your role in context of this subsection within the laboratory? What does your evidence demonstrate? Also write a smaller justification as to why you chose your evidence for this subsection. Also write what was your training like when it comes to this subsection. Writing a smaller reflective statement at the end of each subsection will then make it much easier at the end of the section. Each subsection also has evidence of achievement. This is a part where your training officer signs you off as competent and fit to practice as a BMS at the specialist level. Training officer will confirm that you can work in accordance with local SOPs relevant to this section. They will also confirm that you have answered questions set by them to test knowledge and skills relevant to this section. And they will confirm that your chosen evidence demonstrates your competence relevant to this section. You will need to be signed off as competent by internal assessor for this section. This can be your training officer, senior BMS overseeing this section, or a training lead. Questions should be set by the training officer. They need to be based around the knowledge requirements, relevant for each subsection. They should allow the candidate to demonstrate their understanding in each subsection. The questions should be specific and relevant to the candidate's in-house practice. They should also allow the candidate to demonstrate their specialist knowledge. If you would like to see specific example questions, please have a look at the video for trainers. Link will be included in the video description. These are some ideas for supportive evidence you will have to submit to demonstrate your competence in this area. Some more ideas for supportive evidence to demonstrate your competence in this area. I would also like to share with you some helpful tips that can make your portfolio look really good. Try to present the information in various formats such as tables, pictures, photographs, diagrams, flowcharts, graphs, or even videos, if you can. This nicely breaks down a lot of text that is usually present in specialist portfolios. Try to make it a little bit more interesting to the reader, which will be your training officer and eventually the assessor. Try to put yourself in their shoes. How would you like to read hundreds of pages of plain text? There is a saying I really like, and it goes like this: a picture is worth 1,000 words. I will make a video. I will share with you my evidence I used for my portfolio back in the day. Hopefully that will help. Also try to use various types of evidence, not just one type, like case studies for each subsection. You could use experiments, case studies, annotated results, annotated photographs of you performing tasks, evidence of troubleshooting, annotated EQA results, nonconformances, validation and verification as comparisons of different approaches and their pros and cons, control material production, certificates of course attendance with reflective statements, annotated images or charts, and so on. Try to bring in your personality. Think about the ways you like to learn best. If you like experimenting, perform experiments. Like troubleshooting, perform troubleshooting. Choose something that demonstrates your understanding, knowledge, skills, and how you apply this in your practice. And one more thing, keep the competence requirements in mind when you selecting your evidence. Good evidence will tick off several requirements. And this brings me to the end of today's video. Hopefully you now have a better understanding about the knowledge and competence requirement for tissue selection subsection. And I hope you also have a better idea what evidence you can choose to demonstrate your competence. And my final take-home message? Keep those requirements in mind when answering questions and selecting your evidence. Bye for now.